Welcome to our next episode of Dare to Innovate. Thank you for watching or listening. With me today, I have our CEO, Scott Gilbert. So Scott, thank you for joining me again. And with me, I have Nicola Whiting, who is our Vice President and General Manager of one of our business units based out of Edinburgh, and specifically has some great industry expertise when it comes to expense management and mobility. So Nicola, thank you so much for joining. Today, we're going to talk about trends in mobility. In a variety of different manners, whether that be technology shifts or plan shifts, an industry that is ever evolving with new devices, new technology, new ways for people to access that as mobility continues to evolve. We'll talk specifically about expense management as something near and dear to our heart as an organization, as well as something very important for the enterprise. So we're going to go ahead and dive on in. So Nicola and Scott, thank you guys again for joining, and thank you to the listeners out there. So when we think about trends in mobility and specifically around expense management, we've had a few evolutions. Obviously, as we went into the pandemic and things shut down, mobility devices and access to different sorts of applications became extremely important, but travel also went down. And we've seen an evolution in, from 4G to 5G and other things that are continuing to come out. And so I'd be interested as we begin to dive into this topic. Let's talk about the impact of the pandemic previously and now the impact of it loosening up as travel is beginning to come back up. Nicola, what are your thoughts in terms of how mobility has evolved over the last couple of years and what we see going forward?
I think one of the important things we've seen is people leveraging not necessarily the physical phone in their hand, but the actual applications that they can deploy on the phone in hand. So we're seeing more and more organisations enabling their users to, whether it's travel or be more productive just by using applications on their devices. And that can be the simple applications such as having Teams deployed on everybody's devices that lets them cut down on the amount of money they spend on making phone calls because they can communicate with their workforce over Teams. So it can be simple as that. It can be the ability to be away from home, travel again, but not necessarily be as concerned about travel costs, because travel plans have changed, tariffs have become more inclusive. There's quite a lot of change that's been driven by also the types of technology that's available as well. So technology's come a long way, applications have come a long way, and the vendors have come a long way in terms of the plans and tariffs that they can now offer as well.
Scott, what are your thoughts in terms of kind of those trends as well?
Yeah, as usual, Nicola nailed it. I think that I sort of identified two. One is the first one Nicola mentioned, which is the functionality of the mobile device increasing. So not just do I get text messages and emails on it anymore, but now, you know what, I want to look up a file, or I want to send a Teams message, or I want to approve an expense report. So the mobile device, in terms of the number of functions being done with it, has increased. And I think that did accelerate during the pandemic. The second one that I would say from a mobility trend, and I feel it's especially relevant, at least here in the U.S., is we're seeing one of the first things happen in the recent history from a mobility and technology perspective, which is the decommissioning of technology. So the phase out of 3G, we haven't had that happen in a long time where all of a sudden someone said, hey, I need to go and replace technology. They've done it because something new or better was available, but now it's being driven by the actual decommissioning of something. So I think that's an entirely new trend that won't say it's related to the pandemic per your original question, but it is very relevant.
Yeah, so when we think about the move from 4G to 5G or 3G to 5G and the decommissioning that, it's certainly something that's a focal point here in North America or in the U.S. But you're going to continue to see that as you go through the globe as carriers move to the latest network. what are the things that our organizations need to be thinking about as, they want to support 5G? There's positives with it, and we've also seen negatives, certainly in terms of some of the coverage, some of the, call quality and other things that have come up with that. So, Nicola, what are the things organizations should be thinking about as they think about replacing their devices?
There's a lot of it's driven by where customers are in their device estate cycle anyway. So it's quite a big leap to get everybody on to 5G enabled devices. So what we're seeing a lot of customers doing is doing that incrementally rather than big bang, roll it out, do wholesale estate change. We're seeing incremental change. And I think what actually the big thing is, it'll not be probably this year, it'll be next year that we see most organisations having full 5G enabled devices out there. So they're on this journey. Scott made a really interesting point, and I've seen a growing trend of this. We talk about replacing technology, and it's related to mobility, but it's also not. But we're actually seeing a growing trend of customers replacing physical telephony infrastructure within their office environments because of mobility, because of applications such as Teams. And mobility is enabling them to do that. It's enabling them to say, I'm going to not have this physical infrastructure anymore because we've got such a widespread of mobility that we don't need this anymore, and drive costs down in a different area of their business completely. And like most organisations during the pandemic, just deployed mobility everywhere. Everybody have a phone, everybody's gone home. And now everybody's taking 3 steps back and saying that trend of mass deployment actually might work to our advantage as we decommission the back end of our infrastructure as well. So it was in my head before, I know it's off topic, but just before I forget.
I wouldn't imagine you staying on topic if something popped into your head. But let's go there. It's an interesting trend that we're seeing within the organization. But that kind of pivots me to another topic that I wanted to talk about that becomes vitally important. If you are mass deploying and you're decommissioning other things that people use to be able to communicate, to be able to do work, for replacing it with mobility, it becomes even more important to have a great understanding of what I actually have. So I know that Nicola Whiting doesn't have 7 devices that she's using. She has the right things to be able to do her job, but also isn't over-provisioned to have multiple different items. So when we think about, audit and optimization or estate management, Scott, as we begin to think about those topics with network modernization and other things they may be decommissioning, what should our organizations be thinking about when it comes to estate management?
I think if we relate it back to the sort of overall theme of this discussion, which is trends, I think it really comes down to looking hard at the device itself and what that device can do, and recognizing that, I think we talked about it earlier, instead of every employee getting the phone and the iPad and the laptop, is the reality that you can eliminate some of these devices as one or more of those devices has more functionality to it. And I think that's what we're going to see continue, is that the lines will blur between phones and tablets, for example, and the vast majority of what you see it especially like in the logistics, right? Whether it's the UPS driver or whatever, is, they used to come out with that big tablet thing, and now it's just a phone. Or if you look at Amazon, it is actually their phone that they're doing it with. So continuing to look at what features and functions are available on the device, and instead of saying, well, look, our policy is phone, tablet, laptop, saying, hey, maybe because of the technology on this phone, we can eliminate the tablet, or vice versa, whatever that makes sense for the individual organization.
Or eliminate the laptop. I mean, when you look at, functionality that's ever increased on a tablet, or the convergence of tablet and laptop, there becomes a interesting, decision-making points as functionality increases and everything moves to the cloud. What is the necessity of the types of devices that an employee needs to actually accomplish their specific task. So Nicola, as we're talking about, estate management, and we're talking about the understanding the correct device that the employee needs to be able to drive their function, what are other recommendations that you would have or other thoughts that you have around that topic?
Control and visibility of what you've actually got. So having a clear, systematic way, so not an Excel spreadsheet ideally, of tracking who's got what have they got, when did they get it, how long until it needs to be changed, how much should they be paying for it, do they have 7 of them? So having a really good inventory and having that process of I need something new feed into the inventory. So not have I procure things over here and I have an inventory over here, like have them intertwined, so that your inventory is dynamic and it's live and it moves with you as your organisation ebbs and flows. And then on top of that is optimise that inventory. So validate that there's, if people have got mobile devices, that they're being used. Or do they have one because they feel it's important for their own personal satisfaction of I've got a mobile phone, that means I'm important? Or is it because they actually need one for the purpose of their job? So validate that they've got one that they need, it's going to meet their requirements, and then validate that it's on the right plan. So if their usage profile is that they travel internationally all the time, have we optimised the plan that they've got to meet their trend of usage? So there's no surprises for anybody. They get what they need. They have a good experience, and the overarching organisation can still control their costs, manage their costs. I think inventory's key. To me, inventory is like the most important thing that you can have, and it to be dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. We could have 100 podcasts on 100 different topics, and if they're all sort of tangential to expense management, that will always be the theme that comes up: inventory and the quality and accuracy and control of the inventory. Doesn't matter whether you're talking about cost savings or employee experience, whatever it is, the quality and accuracy of inventory is critical.
Scott was talking specifically about UPS or Amazon or any of those others. It's really interesting to me as I think about mobility and you look at the landscape. Mobility means very different things to different organizations. And even within an organization, it can mean something different depending on the role within the company. As Scott, as CEO, he needs his device to do certain things. As someone that is out there, delivering something or in the back office managing that, how inventory can be managed in a variety of different ways. Why is there any need to have contextual understanding of what inventory is? What is this person's role and what should they have? What are the thoughts on that kind of topic, Nicola?
Massive. Like, you should be able to say, based on this person's role within the organisation, this is the technology that they need to be successful. And as people ebb and flow through organisations, which they do, people get promoted, people change roles, the devices that they have become either no longer valid or they become unproductive for the role that they've now moved into. So actually being able to say, we've got 1,000 people in this role and they've all got the same devices, they've all got the same technology, they're all on the same playing field, is massive. And we're seeing a growing trend of companies actually starting to pay more attention to the function that the person plays within their organisation and the technology that's linked to the function, and make functional choices about, well, these people can get these types of devices, which is a higher spec than the people over here that can get these devices because their functions determine why they're different.
So that's actually a really interesting topic. And Scott, I have, specifically on that. We have talked about a lot with devices and plans. But, in general, when we look across our enterprises, there are two main devices that end up getting deployed. And there's not a lot of difference between them. It can be personal preference, it can be organizational preference, whether it be security or things like that. I find that the device really doesn't matter anymore. It comes to the applications that are physically on there. And those applications could potentially cost more than the device and the service and everything that they have. Is that something that we're seeing within the enterprise? Or what are your thoughts on that? The device doesn't matter. It really matters what they can do with it, which comes down to the applications that are on the devices and physically how you manage those applications.
Yeah, I hate to say it. I hate to say it because it's just my opinion, but I'll say it anyway. So I do believe that it's a bit generational. So I think the device does matter with the younger generation. There is an expectation of, I want to express myself through the device I have. I don't want the silver iPhone. I want the blue iPhone. Or I don't like iPhones. I want an Android. And I think the generation that has grown up with the ability, with a larger choice of technology, I do believe that look, you can't just order one corporate phone and everyone gets that phone and you don't get to choose. And I think that, in my opinion, will continue to be a case. Now, the good news is that the devices and the sophistication of the systems should allow that as a company continues to mature. And I think the way you do that is through, I think Nicola's first favorite word is control. I think her second favorite word is policy. And so if you do that through policy, you can allow that individualism, which I personally believe is going to be important as the current generation of employee gets younger and younger. Nicola, I think you disagreed a little bit.
I actually don't think it's generational at all. I think that a lot of organisations still have this kind of standard, you'll get a black or a white phone. It will be an iPhone 12 or a 13, but it'll be black or white because it's a corporate owned device. And if you want it to be pink, put a pink cover on it, but we're not going to give you colour choices. Your individuality can come out in other ways. So it's actually really hard for organisations to meet everybody's expectations. Like, not everybody's always going to be happy. So it's actually sometimes simpler to say our corporate policy is that you can get an iPhone X and it will be these colours. We're not addressing the individuality because it's actually almost impossible to make everybody happy.
You know, as usual, you guys answered half of my question. But you know, when it comes down to it, isn't it more about the application than the device? When you think about the functionality that we're delivering to an end user and to someone that needs to go do their job, doesn't it come down to more of the applications that physically sit on that device than the device itself? When we go back through the history of mobility, so if you go back 10 or you go back 15 or you go back 20 years, you go back to your original, BlackBerry device or previous to that, now we have the capability to almost be ubiquitous from the applications I have on a laptop to the applications that I have on a device, or custom built applications do a purpose built job. Whether you choose an Android device or an Apple device doesn't really matter. It matters about the application that sits on the device.
I 100% agree. And I would say versus application, I would use the word just functionality, or what am I using this device for? And I think the important thing, and again, talking about it from a trend perspective, is I want as few devices as possible. I don't want to have 4 different devices in order to get my job done. And that's why it does come down to the function of the device and saying, hey, if I have to have a company phone, can I do more on it? Or do I have to carry the company phone, but then when I need to do this, I have to use my laptop, and then when I have to do this, I have to use that on a tablet. So I do think that as an organization is rolling it out, recognizing that most people want simple, They want simplicity. They don't want to have to use more than they need to in order to get their job done, is an important consideration in that device selection process.
So, Nicola, are we seeing a trend in terms of, and I think you talked about it a little bit, but a trend in terms of, do you start with the application or the job function that someone has, and then you work your way back to, all right, they need these sorts of applications, and their job is to do X. And are we seeing the trend that then the form factor is chosen? I go back historically, I would say the device was chosen first, and then we figure out what, applications were necessary. Is there a trend in the other direction now?
I would actually say the trend in part is driven by security. There's a massive drive around security. So device choices are corporately often driven by security. The security team will actually decide which type of devices will get deployed within the corporate environment, because they'll have vetted that they can meet that organisation's security requirements, because more information is held on the device. Emails are on there, files accessible are on there. Like, there's way more information on that mobile phone than ever was before. So actually, we're seeing more and more companies let security drive device choices, and that security is, how can I secure the device through applications? What applications am I going to put in there that may be security risks? So I actually think the trend is very much tilted to, how secure can I make the data that is now available on that device, rather than the device itself or the applications that's on it. Is, how do I lock the data down and keep it safe?
Security is always an interesting topic, regardless of what it is, because you have to balance security against usability. You certainly can make something absolutely secure, or within, what you believe is absolute, but usability goes to zero. You can't function in your job, or it takes you, an hour to function in your job, which should take 5 minutes. And, we all feel that when it comes to corporate versus personal, whether, not that we want to give out our data personally, but we're using generally commercially or, consumerly available applications. So, Scott, when we think about security versus usability, it's always an interesting topic when it comes to mobility. And what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, look, the trend in that is obviously leaning more and more towards control, and I'll say absolute control, right? So in terms of the ability to remotely wipe devices, the ability to completely air gap within that device things that are personal versus things that are business related, and it's a pendulum. I would say right now it is swinging way towards security and less towards functionality. And it'll kind of swing back as the world develops, and as the sophistication of the security programs available continue to develop. But it is definitely swinging towards control right now, and I think that is very much tied to the fact that Nicola just mentioned, which is these devices now have a lot more valuable information on them than they did when it was just a phone that I made and received phone calls from.
That brings me to an interesting question for you, Nicola. Is, are we seeing a trend in our customers and in the industry in general that we serve, of the commingling of personal and corporate data? So is someone using a device that is both personal and corporate, in the BYOD world potentially, but are we seeing that with corporate devices, or is this generally going to, purpose-built device for, XYZ corporate application? And, what are we seeing out there?
I think we see a combination of things. I think often corporate policy dictates what people are permitted to use their corporately owned device for. So policy, I wouldn't say has dramatically changed. So a lot of people say if you've got a corporate phone, it's for corporate purposes. The thing that's actually driving change is the functionality around dual SIM devices, and the fact that people could carry a single device with their personal SIM in there and their corporate SIM in there, and there's applications out there that allows them to create that separation on the device of their data. We're actually seeing a growing trend of leveraging technology, leveraging enhancements in devices to allow people, to your point earlier, Scott, to make it simpler, carry a single event, have one phone, but have separation. And what we're seeing more customers now do is, because you can get dual SIMs, because technology has come on, are starting to flex policy to say you can have a corporately liable device, you can use it for personal if you have a personal SIM in there, if you've definitely loaded AirWatch onto your device, if. So it's changing. I think it will change dramatically over the next 12, 18 months. Dual SIM is becoming more and more prevalent along with the concept of eSIMs. It's making it easier for people to create that single carry one phone event, but have separation.
It gets me into kind of moves into another topic, but kind of closing off on that one as well is, why would a corporation care if I have unlimited plans? I'm not paying anything more. Why do I care if they use some for personal and some for that? It helps the employee experience. It gives them a benefit. Why would I care? Scott?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to the ability to air gap the business versus the personal. So if I'm using my phone and it's got all of my files on it and links to that, and then I'm also using it for personal, and I get that spam email or that phishing email, and I click the link, all of a sudden, am I opening up exposure to my data or my network or my functionality to bad actors? So I think that's always been the reason. To your point, I don't think at this point anymore it is about, hey, I'm using this much data on the phone, and a bunch of it was for Netflix, and a little bit of it was for work. Just because, to your point, a lot of it's unlimited. I think it's more about security and the integrity of the separation between business and personal data.
So our final topic for today is something that we haven't necessarily seen within the industry, and it's a little bit specific within the U.S. in terms of, we've actually seen a price increase in with AT&T and Verizon as the industry in the US has continued to evolve. There's been consolidation, obviously, with Sprint and T-Mobile combining. You have a little bit of less competition, and you've seen an increase from AT&T, Verizon in terms of some of their prices, as well as you're seeing potentially new actors enter the space, whether they be carriers working off of Verizon and AT&T or T-Mobile. You see T-Mobile announcing, they're going to partner with SpaceX in terms of, delivering some, satellite coverage in those areas that you haven't seen it. 5G presents some options for other actors to enter the space of vendors within that. But we've seen a price increase out of the two of the largest carriers. How should our organizations be looking at the landscape as you think about, the U.S. market right now? Nicola, I'll start with you.
I think benchmarking is key. So being able to benchmark and compare usage versus price is massive. Being able to be flexible in the contractual terms that you agree, so that if you want to move, you can. That you build flexibility into contractual alignment. So that you could deplete your estate with one vendor over the other at short notice, because you could get a better price somewhere else. We've seen that happen quite a lot as we've seen customers, as Sprint and T-Mobile came together. We actually saw a massive amount of customers make decisions to go to AT&T or go to Verizon and make wholesale change driven by that specific change, but help them benchmark their way into that environment. So price checking is important. And then pool management, make sure that you're actually leveraging the tariffs that you're given in order to make sure they meet your requirements, they align to your needs, your usage, and not just what happens on day one. Constantly validate it.
Yeah,
Scott, final point?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct in terms of what I'll say is running your program disciplined, right? Not just accepting the rates, negotiating your rates, doing all of your inventory checks and stuff like that. I think the other part of it becomes a little more strategic in terms of the design of the program and the functionality. So, look, I know they increased rates, but I think if we look at the investment that those companies are making in the wireless infrastructure, I think it would be difficult to suggest that it's not maybe a little bit warranted. They are deploying a massive amount of network and connectivity to a very, very large area. So then the question is, if I'm going to continue to take advantage of the fact that now I have 5G ultra wide versus 3G, what else can I do with it? Can I consolidate functionality? I think to Nicola's point, can we reduce our in-house infrastructure or our wired infrastructure? Because now we can do much more over this cellular infrastructure that we have to pay a little bit more for anyway. So I do think there's an aspect of it where you have to recognize the increased functionality that these larger, more robust networks can provide and incorporate that into your overall technology estate and planning.
Fantastic. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining. Nicola, really appreciate you joining us and debating some of these topics here and talking about mobility trends. Scott, as usual, appreciate you being on Dare to Innovate. To those out there listening, thank you guys so much. Looking forward to our next session as we come up. And thank you guys. Have a great day.
Stay on top of the conversation. Like and subscribe to our channel to get notified when our newest episodes release. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Dare to Innovate.